Okay,
Hello and
sounds good.
welcome to Leadership, Relationships, and Change. I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler, the Relationship Help Doctor, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Dr. Drum McNaughton, the Change Leader. And remember that you can always find us where we'll several times put up our websites for you so that you know where you can go if you hear something that you like and you'd like to know more about it. So today we're talking about an interesting topic that we
And I apologize.
pardon?
I was going to say I can't find my banner for you.
Don't worry about it. So today we're talking about a topic that we've touched on before in a couple of our episodes, but today we wanted to talk about it really square on, and that's how trust impacts change. And earlier, just before we went to recording this call, we were talking with Roy, who's on line listening with us, and about the importance of trust and whether or not that is something that people really talk about in a relationship at work, or they're just hoping that it exists. So what do you think, Drum? He thinks I'll have
Trust is
another
one of
cup of
those
coffee.
things that it takes some.
I love your
think so.
comment, Roy.
Why
I
not?
love the times
As
we're living
Roy
in
said
tech-wise.
earlier,
Yeah, me too.
coffee's
I
great.
can't even keep the co-host online.
Yeah.
So
And we're
if you're
having a bit
listening
of
to this
a
as a
feedback, not
replay, I'm
feedback, but
sorry for
delay.
this. I don't know why we're having this technological joy, but we are. And there's important things to discuss here, because sometimes we go on trust that trust exists. And we think that we should trust everybody, and I'm of that mind. I think absolutely give the gift of trust until proven otherwise. I don't think there's much point in being leery or suspicious of other people. They will soon enough show us who they are. And people have a real habit of showing us who they are if we're watching. And the one thing that I would say about that is always believe their behavior. If their behavior matches their words, great. If their behavior doesn't match their words, believe their behavior. And I can't say that loudly enough or frequently enough. You know, I work with a lot of private clients, and I do executive coaching. And so frequently someone will say, oh, but they said that they were going to do that. Great. What evidence in reality do you have that they will do that or they did do that? It's the behavior. If you're constantly getting excuses for why something can't be done, believe the fact that the job is not getting done. Believe the fact that this person makes excuses. And it's hard to get our head around that. And often I'm dealing with people in interpersonal relationships. That's my specialty. And say I'm working with a couple, and they really want to believe that the other person has their best interest at heart. But every demonstration, everything that they do shows that they don't. And yet, because they've got their blinders on, they want to believe that the other person means what they say. Yet the behavior of the other person clearly shows that they don't. And we always have to believe the behavior. It's a hard lesson. And when people are dating, I always tell them, you know, it's really hard to see red flags when you're wearing rose-colored glasses. And it's so important for us to take off the rose-colored glasses. That doesn't mean we're not going to be kind. It means we're going to be honest. We're going to see what's actually there. We're going to see what the person is presenting in their behavior as well as their words. And as I said, believe the behavior if they don't match the words. So it's a hard lesson, because sometimes we don't want the person's behavior to be true. So we make excuses for them, or we rationalize their behavior, or we justify their behavior. Because I work with a very specific population, I work with the partners, the exes, the adult children, and the coworkers of what I call chronically difficult people. And I trademarked the term hijackals for them. Hijackals, in my definition, are people who hijack relationships for their own purposes while relentlessly scavenging them for power, status, and control. And if you think you might be with a hijackal, that needs different strategies than being with a non-hijackal. So go to hijackals.com and get my free ebook called How to Spot a Hijackal, so that you know the difference between a chronically difficult person, a hijackal, and a momentarily difficult person, a non-hijackal. Because if you are with a hijackal, you need special strategies. And the thing that you can trust about a hijackal is that they are going to be predictable in their negative behaviors. So that's not really what we think of when we think about trust. We think about all that givingness and allowing and having people available to us to have an interaction with that we believe we can count on. But sometimes we can only trust that somebody's going to behave in a negative pattern. And we're showing that over time, and that requires us to be free of our rose-colored glasses. So that happens. I was speaking last year at the California HR conference. I was speaking about hijackals and chronically difficult people in the workplace, and someone asked the question, well, what happens to them at work? And I said, I'm not trying to be funny, but the answer is they mostly get promoted. They will get a lateral or a vertical move just to get them out of the group, because you can't trust when you're dealing with a hijackal. You can't trust in a positive way. So very, very difficult. So make sure that you know that you can ask your questions down in the bottom right corner of your screen, and you will see the questions come up there. Trust in organizations means it is connected to the people that are in the organizations, of course, because in my books there isn't anything aside from a group of people connected around a common mission that is what the definition of an organization or a corporation is. So it's all about the people, but there's history involved, and there are myths involved. The myths of how the company works are sometimes very, very different than the actuality of how the company works. I don't know if you've experienced that, Roy, but I certainly have seen that a lot in my business consulting. We have a big story about, oh yes, well, we run on trust and honesty and everything, and then you start looking at what's actually going on in the organization, and there is neither trust nor honesty. That's definitely problematic. So yes, and when that happens, everybody's very uneasy, of course, and then there's resentment. And of course, with that unease goes fear. So big problem. And sometimes things happen in organizations that you can't really fault them for, because some things just don't work out the way they wanted. And so that's not really them being untrustworthy. It's just a plan that didn't come together. But where it often falls apart is in the interpersonal relationships. So that when you can't count on the person in the next cubicle, or your superior tells you they want something one way, and then you do it that way, and you go back to them and they say, why didn't you do it another? There's no trust in that. When you can confide in someone that I would like to be upwardly mobile, or I'd like to work on a particular project, and you think you're talking to somebody who will take that into account and be helpful about it, and they take it into account and make sure that you don't get it so that they can take your place. You know, a lot of credit being stolen, things like that happen in the workplace frequently. And so our topic today is how trust impacts change. Well, one of the things for sure that it does is if there isn't any trust, there's going to be a change. It may only be an internal change in you because you now don't believe what was going on. but it definitely is going to create change, whether that's internal to you or it's company-wide. So important. And, you know, Roy, you make the comment that resentment is huge. It is. It's absolutely huge. And the earlier that we can understand and acknowledge that we're in resentment, the better off. Because when we are in resentment, we have to have some outlets for it. And we have to also be able to take ourselves through a process of self-awareness that says, okay, where's this resentment coming from? Is it an expectation that I had? Was it implicit or explicit? Did someone actually tell me that I could logically have this expectation? Or did I assume I could have that expectation? That's big. And then what is actually transpiring person to person? And is this group-wide? Is it department-wide? Is it company-wide? What's going on? And in most organizations, unless they're very, very, very small and very, very agile, you're going to see that change grinds slowly. So there's going to be a lot of resentment grinding under things before that slows things down to a pace that nobody can stand, and then somebody may do something about it. You know, I think it was 2004 that Dan Dina did a study in workplace conflict. And at that point, he found, with quite a large study, he found that up to 47% of an employee's time was spent engaging in or resolving conflict or suffering from it. Up to 47%. So I was doing a lot of speaking at that time, going from one conference to another speaking, and I would often ask people to you know, figure it out in your work day. How much time is lost to expressed or unexpressed conflict? And I got numbers up to 60% of the time. Now, some wonderful places that were very small, as it turned out, had very low conflict. But that's a lot of time to have conflict. And how much of that is coming from trust that has been misplaced and causing a problem? Yeah, 47% of time spent engaging in or are being affected by conflict. So I don't think it's going down, because since 2004, we've been through the recession, which caused so much more fear, so much more concern in the workplace, and a sense of more scarcity that we're just now, I think, getting a little healthier about. So trust then plays a huge factor, because if I am having internal conflict or external conflict, where it is actually visible to the organization and it is constant, then there's all that lost time. And we all know that time lost cannot be regained. That's true enough. But then what happens if somebody finally just gets tired and quits? You know the cost of somebody quitting and training somebody else, and the time lost in getting them up to speed. And it's an extremely expensive proposition in terms of money and time. So quite the consideration, quite the consideration. And recently, when I've spoken to people about conflict in the workplace, I have heard really high numbers, and I've heard some that are much, much lower. And the high numbers are attributable to mostly coworkers, and the low numbers seem to be attributable to having greater process at work. I know when we went through the recession, the training budgets were terribly cut back. And so for me to be called in to help people with team building activities, and I don't do the kind that you go off and have a day, you know, jumping off mountains and things. I do the kind where you go inside and you learn to work with the people that in your group in a much deeper and much more meaningful and effective way. But people were saying, oh, no, we can't have that. I mean, our bottom line is what we have to maintain, and we don't have time for that. So we're kind of clawing our way back now to being able to help people have better experiences working together in individual workplaces and getting some training, which leads to higher levels of trust. So very, very important. So there's a book called Trust in Organizations. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's a good read if you happen to be of interest in this topic. Lots of statistics which can be helpful. But when I relate trust in organizations to the people side, the relationship side of the business world, because of my hijackal interest, I get concerned, because at least 4% of people in the world have DNA changes that will allow them to behave in ways that are less than wonderful. And about 11% of people are actually able to be diagnosed with problems that lead to the same hijackal behaviors. So any subsection of the population, such as an organization, for instance, is going to have similar numbers. Now, if you have a small organization and everybody's handpicked, maybe not. But the larger numbers, you're going to have that similar kind of structure. And you need to have something that you know you can do with that and for that. And that's tricky. It's tricky. And I'll tell you why I think it's tricky. Is because each one of us came from a different kind of home. I remember giving a big workshop for Trans-Canada Pipeline up in Calgary, and asking people, you know, I think I mentioned this on one show before, to go and stand on one wall if the home that you came from was let it all hang out, tell it like it is, yell and scream, and then go give your partner a hug kind of house. And on the other wall, go stand over there if conflict was swept under the carpet and nobody said anything about it. So there were 300 people in the room, and there they were, big number at one end, big number at the other, and a small sampling all the way across. So my instruction at that point was look around and just think, if you're on one wall and the person in the next cubicle to you is on the other wall, what are you going to think about their conflict management style? It's going to be a problem. So think about what happens when you marry somebody from a different family, or you live with someone from a different family. You got a lot of learning to do. And that learning is the only way that you can build trust. Because you have to come to understand what that person is really seeing the world as, and what's pushing their buttons, and what is likely to be their main mindset when they see things. And know that they're not doing it to you, they're just being it. That's a big deal. You know, somebody's behaving like that over there, that just simply means that's them behaving like that, and I can observe that. But what, for many people, what happens is you put yourself in front of them and then you think they're doing it to you. No, they're just doing it until you give it the meaning it has for you. So a lot of things to look at in this situation. Absolutely. So it seems like we've completely lost Drum. But if at any time you want to go and see what he's up to, remember that you go to thechangedleader.com, because he's doing some really interesting things, particularly in higher education and nonprofits, about moving in directions of trust and change. And my work, as you can find out at forrelationshiphelp.com, is interpersonal work. How we build good relationships with ourselves, within ourselves, and with other people. And Roy says a person's kidhood is important to know about in marriage and in deep, intimate relationships. Absolutely. It's going to predicate what happens, particularly at your most tense moments. And we don't have any say over that. You know, we're born into this world as a little blob. We're not like cows and horses. We don't get spit out, licked off, and then we leap up and jump around the meadow. We get spit out and we go, oh my goodness, I'm a blob. I can't move. I can't feed myself. I can't go anywhere. Help! So we learn to be dependent on the giants and keep them happy. Like, what do I have to do to get them to feed me and do all the things I need? Can you
hear me at all?
When we get into a situation where our childhood, which has been done to us, and through which we have looked at the models of our parents and other significant adults and said, oh, that's how you do it. That's how you're in a relationship. That's how you talk to people. That's how you look at people. That's the language you use. That's the tone of voice. That's the body posture. We're watching all the time. We have mirror neurons that are picking all this up, reflecting back what the way to be is. So as adults, it's very important for us to sort of do some work with somebody. You know, I have clients all over the world because of the magic of the internet, thank heaven. I have a nice private meeting room on Zoom, and I work with them there. And we'll look at, okay, where'd you get this? Where did it come from? And take things out and look at them and say, do you want them now? Do they actually work for you now? Do they fit now? Do they represent your value system? Do you want to keep doing this? And let people reconstruct their lives on that basis. So very important for us to have that time. Exactly. Yes. Relationships traits are not taught, they're caught. Of course they are, because we have an undeveloped brain when we're little, and that brain has mirror neurons and it's picking up everything. It's just like, oh, this is how to stand. You know, a good example of that is you have a little child who takes their first step, and everybody's watching them take their first step, and you go, oh, look at that, they're standing just like their dad. Well, of course they are, because they saw and watched studiously for a year how their dad stands, and they're copying it. And so,
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
So
I don't know what happened.
They're copying that, and the mirror neurons have allowed them to have that copy. And that's what happens for all the things that were stored inside us before we had language. So when we're looking at our ability to trust, can we trust the adults who are taking care of us? You know, take something as clear as this, and you might want to jump in at this point, Drum. You know, say you're a young child and you say, well, I feel really sad about that. And a validating parent comes along and says, oh, honey, I can see why you're really sad about that. What are you thinking? Or an invalidating parent comes along and says, well, you have no reason to be sad. Look at all the good things in your life. Now, my experience has just been taken away from me. And if that's happened, then I am beginning to lose trust. So I take that whole experience into the workplace. How am I with trust?
Well, those patterns are established as a very young child. And some people stop their growth when they have an event like this, and they're not able to overcome those kind of things as an adult. You know, early on in the conversation, you know, you made a comment about being able to trust people not by their words, but by their actions. My mother used to have a saying. What was it? Something along the lines of, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It takes sometimes years to build trust, and only moments to destroy it. And change is totally dependent on two things in the workplace. One, your own mental models, how you feel. and two, the trust that you have in your leadership. Because the leadership wants to take you in a certain direction. Do you trust them that they are actually going to be able to, one, do what they say they do, and two, what's going to be the impact on you? And if you don't have that trust, the change will never happen.
Now, how do you get that trust?
Walk, you know, it comes out of that old saying, do what you say you're going to do. People need to know that they care. People need to know, it's like the old saying that you hear in school. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I know a university right now who just laid off, you know, another, you know, they didn't have a whole lot of full-time faculty as it was. They only had about 35. They just laid off another 10 people. This is on top of something they did 4 years ago where they laid off almost half. The people there don't trust anymore. And
No.
It's going to die.
Well, there's a reason that we say somebody's demoralized. I mean, if I can't trust the place that's the source of my income and on which I'm building a life, I'm not going to engage in that source either. So slowly it's going to be just diminishing returns, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Roy just had a good comment. He says, I just give it because no one can earn my trust. I can only give it or not.
Oh,
and
so
that's
agree.
True. It's a personal choice. But many people come into a situation saying, prove to me that you're trustworthy. Others come in and say, I will trust you until you give me reason not to. Some people you'll just meet and your intuition will tell you they're not trustworthy. Whereas others, you'll trust them and they'll give you good reason to trust them as they continue on. A breaking of trust really is a breaking of your expectations of how a certain person should act.
Exactly, and I think that speaks directly to what Roy was saying, and which I agree with entirely. Trust is a gift you give; it's not earned in the initial stages. You know, like sometimes when I'm working with couples and somebody's cheated, right, and yet they're working with me because they obviously would like to get back to some kind of proximity with each other. And that's a big discussion that we have to have. Like, all right, trust is a gift you can give again. Are you willing?
Right.
Well, of course, they're gun shy, but are you willing? Because that's the only place that it can go. I mean, I can't, the partner who cheated cannot have every time they take a step, they're second guessed. I mean, that will destroy the relationship too.
Yeah.
So we do some work together, and then I ask that question: are you willing to give the gift of trust once again? And then we start there. Yeah. Yeah. Roy says it all has to do with your own backstory and not theirs because you don't even know their backstory yet. Exactly. I mean,
to me, it goes a little bit beyond that, though, because certain people have intuition, and depending on your definition of intuition, if it is Western definition, you know, pattern recognition, Eastern definition, you know, from the soul, God realization type intuition. If you have that deeper, that Eastern intuition, you can generally get a sense of someone, whether they're trustworthy or not. It's when you're not depending on that more pure intuition, it becomes more of your own backstory. That's not to say that the Eastern side isn't polluted with some of the backstory either. It certainly can be. So.
Yeah, and just knowing that you have that power to give trust, you know, and you can be fresh and new every moment. You know, maybe that sounds a little Pollyanna, but truly, you know, what would we do with homeless people? Would we say, all right, now now you've shown you can't be trusted with money, so you'll live on the street forever? Or do we say, oh, that was really unfortunate, let's start again, right? Let's do that. How about somebody coming out of prison? They've paid the price. Do we then never trust them? Or do we give them the gift of, all right, show me until you show me there isn't, you can have my trust?
A lot of it, I think, has to do with the giver of the trust versus the individual. And that goes right back to Roy's comment about our own backstory. You know, that old saying, you know, once burned, shame on you, twice burned, shame on me. There are people who trust too easily.
They're called gullible.
Yeah. Or naive. Or naive. The thing is to be able to develop a higher level discrimination to know when it's appropriate to trust, when it's appropriate to verify. You know, I love, it was Paul Nitschke, the arms negotiator for Reagan, who said, trust but verify. I like that.
Yeah.
In the kind of game, the chess game that they were playing, that was very important. With a relationship, which is your specialty, you can't have that second guessing all the time. And if something happens to hurt that trust, how do you rebuild it? Or do you? That's a choice. You choose to rebuild it, or you choose not to.
Yeah, it's a very basic choice. And as I said a little bit ago, yeah, there's some work to do from when they come in, the trust has been broken and everyone acknowledges it has. We have some work to do on the bases of the relationship, the foundations of the relationship and the foundations of the individuals. But then we come to that moment when we say, all right, now, are we willing to trust? Because using the cheating example, yes, it's obvious that the person who was cheated on has to be able to give that trust again. But the person who cheated has to be able to trust the non-cheater to not be hitting them over the head with it all the time and keeping them in the past.
Yes.
So there's mutual trust that has to be developed right there. And it's mostly doable. I agree with what Roy's saying. It's difficult, but doable. I think it's mostly doable. But one of the things that people like to do is to write other people off. Like now, okay, well, that's who you are. And I take the couple example. Well, you're a cheater and you'll always be a cheater. And that's all there is to that story, and done. Well, then you give up something about, let's see, your possibility of relationship, your choice in relationship, the fact that perhaps you have children together and all. You just close something down because you weren't willing to open your heart or your mind to the possibility of trust. Therefore, no change could occur. And change is a really difficult thing, as you pointed out so many times, Trum, isn't it?
Well, it is. In a situation like what you just described, is there a contrition on the part of the person who broke the trust? Can the person whose trust was broken, can they learn to retrust that person? It's usually, and correct me if I'm wrong, my sense is probably a pattern in their life that they need to overcome to figure out, okay, what is it in me that causes me to break someone else's trust? What is it in me that causes me to lose trust? And how do I learn how to build it back, or do I want to? Does that make sense from what you've seen?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there are two ends of the spectrum. I mean, sometimes if we use the cheating story that I was using, sometimes that's a scream for help, in the sense that I can't talk to you, I don't know how to manage the conflict, you won't talk to me, there seems to be an absolute impasse here. And then the person consciously or unconsciously just allows themselves to veer off, and they know that it'll make an event, and
Mhm.
So they go with it, right?
Yeah.
But other people, of course, have a history of doing that. And so we have to watch the patterns as well.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's what I've typically come to understand when you get into a situation like that. It's one person doesn't feel like they can communicate with the other person. There's a wall there. They're not being understood, whatever the reason is. And so they're going to go find, it could be an event to get that person's attention, or it could be that they're just going to find the satisfaction that they need in a relationship. The act of cheating is not quite as, I don't want to say important because it is, but it's just kind of the byproduct of something that's been set up in the past, generally, not always.
Yeah, and if you don't talk to your partner, like I think about a fellow who was sitting in my anger management class one day, and he said, how long, I was talking about giving someone the silent treatment, and he said to me, how long is it normally that someone gives the silent treatment? And I said, well, how long does your wife go without talking to you? And he said, 6 weeks. Right? I said, well, the problem is that either your wife is afraid to talk to you, or your wife doesn't have the skills to communicate or know what she's thinking or feeling, and she needs some help. And you as a couple need some help in order to be able to talk about difficult things. So something can happen where you've got that silent treatment running, or almost the silent treatment running, so you're getting no validation at all from your partner, and eventually you want some validation that you're worthwhile or attractive or interesting, or that somebody cares that you're breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look for it outside of the relationship.
Yeah.
Well, it's a relationship problem, not only one person's problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be something that can be seen and acknowledged and changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been talking about a couple because that's usually the quintessential demonstration of relationship. But you have those same kind of relationships at work, with coworkers, with boss, with subordinate, etc. And these same principles, most people at work don't seem to think that these same principles apply. They really do.
Yeah, they do. And I'm just making a little note here. Roy wrote, the silent treatment sucks. I've had it all too many times. And I'm saying the silent treatment never works except in unequal codependent partnerships.
Yeah.
And if you want to be in an unequal codependent partnership, then go ahead with the silent treatment. But it doesn't sound like a very healthy place to be, does it?
Yeah.
And the same things happen at work. Somebody maybe not giving you the silent treatment because they have to talk to you in a meeting, but they don't talk to you in the hallway, or they blow you off, or you walk up to get something out of the fridge and they walk away. I mean, you've got the same thing happening.
Yeah. And the basis is in trust. If you don't trust that person to communicate clearly, or that they have your back, or that they're not going to try and backstab you, if you don't have that kind of trust, you're not going to have the relationship. We've talked about that before.
Yeah. So some interesting perspectives on how trust impacts change. Change in our insides, change in our personal relationship, change in our organizational relationship. And when you're wanting to learn more about what Dr. Drum McNaughton is up to in the world and how he goes about it, go to thechangeleader.com.
And if you want to find out about Rhoberta and all dealing about the relationships and the hijackals, for relationshiphelp.com.
That's right. And if you want free ebook, go to hijackals.com. The ebook is called How to Spot a Hijackal. And I have something really exciting coming up in September. I'm going to have a membership site, a secret membership site that will be very, very helpful to people dealing with or living with or loving hijackals.
Oh, that ought to be interesting. Now, can they go and pick on other people there without retribution? Is that what it's about?
No hijackals allowed. No, very, very careful, very well vetted new membership site.
Okay.
So, sorry that we lost contact with you, Drum, but we did certainly fill a lot of time on the topic of how trust impacts change. Thanks, Roy, for being with us, and thanks to all you who are watching. Be sure to see others in this series because we've been talking about some very interesting things, and we'll be here again. Drum will be here alone next week with a special guest, perhaps, and I will be back in 2 weeks. So take good care. Great to talk with you, Drum.
Cheers. Bye-bye. I get the recording.